Imagine a wave, 25 feet high, crashing through a major city. Now imagine that wave isn't made of water, but of thick, sticky brown molasses, moving at 35 miles per hour. It sounds like something from a surreal nightmare, but on January 15, 1919, this was the terrifying reality for the people of Boston's North End. A colossal steel tank exploded, unleashing over 2 million gallons of industrial molasses in a deadly brown tide that flattened buildings, twisted elevated train tracks, and smothered everything in its path. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're diving deep into the bizarre and tragic story of the Great Boston Molasses Flood, a disaster that was much more than a weird historical footnote. It was a story of wartime pressure, corporate greed, and a fight for justice that would forever change how our world is built. So how does a city end up drowning in molasses? The story begins not in Boston, but in the sugarcane fields of the Caribbean. Molasses, the thick byproduct of making sugar, had a new, vital purpose in the early 20th century. It was the key ingredient for making industrial alcohol, and industrial alcohol was a crucial component in smokeless gunpowder, the stuff that fueled the cannons and rifles of World War I. With the war raging in Europe, the demand for molasses skyrocketed. It had become a vital sinew of modern warfare, and a company called the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, or U.S.I.A., stood at the top of this incredibly lucrative industry. U.S.I.A. was a corporate giant, a classic trust formed to dominate the market. Led by finance men whose main goal was maximizing profit, the company was in a race against time to produce as much alcohol as possible for the Allied war effort. To streamline their operations, they needed a massive holding tank right on Boston's waterfront, a prime logistical hub. Ships would bring molasses from Puerto Rico and Cuba, pump it into the tank, and then it would be moved by rail to their distillery. The location they chose was 529 Commercial Street, right in the heart of the North End, one of Boston's oldest and most densely populated neighborhoods. This was the center of the city's Italian-American community, a vibrant world of crowded tenement buildings, pushcart vendors, and children playing in the streets. Placing a 2.3 million-gallon industrial tank in the middle of this residential area, next to a playground and a fire station, showed a stunning disconnect. To the executives in New York, it was a point on a map. To the people who lived there, it was home. The construction of this tank, which began in 1915, was a blueprint for disaster. The project was overseen not by an engineer, but by Arthur P. Gell, the company's treasurer. His expertise was in numbers, not structural mechanics, and his main order was to get the tank built as fast and as cheap as possible. The design was fatally flawed from the start. Modern analysis has shown the steel walls of the tank were only about half as thick as they should have been to safely hold the immense pressure of 50 feet of molasses. Think about that. Molasses is 1.5 times denser than water, meaning a full tank weighed over 27 million pounds. The steel chosen was also a problem. It was brittle, especially in the cold, meaning it was more likely to shatter like glass than to bend or stretch under stress. Worse still, the construction was rushed and sloppy. But the most damning failure of all was that the tank was never properly tested. The standard safety procedure is to fill a new tank with water to check for leaks and structural problems. U.S.I.A. skipped this fundamental step. They were gambling with millions of pounds of molasses and the lives of everyone nearby, and from the very beginning, they knew they had a problem. The tank leaked. It leaked constantly. Residents reported dark, sticky streams of molasses weeping from the seams. It was so bad that local children would bring buckets to the base of the tank to scrape up the free sweetener for their families. The company knew all about it. Instead of draining the tank and making proper repairs, which would have been expensive, they just sent workers to caulk the leaks from the outside. This was like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. The tank even audibly groaned and rumbled, especially when new, warmer shipments of molasses were pumped in. Residents complained about the unsettling metallic creaks, but their concerns were dismissed. In a final, cynical move, U.S.I.A. had the tank painted a dark, reddish-brown color, not to prevent rust, but to camouflage the dark streaks of leaking molasses staining its sides. They chose to hide the symptoms of their sick tank rather than cure the disease. Each time the tank was filled and emptied, the steel grew weaker. It was a ticking time bomb, and in January of 1919, the final countdown began. January 15, 1919 was a strange day in Boston. After a bitter cold snap, the temperature soared to an unseasonable 43 degrees Fahrenheit. Just a few days earlier, a new, warm shipment of molasses had been pumped into the tank, mixing with the older, colder molasses already inside. This did two things. It created thermal stress on the brittle steel walls, and it likely kick-started fermentation inside the tank, producing carbon dioxide gas. This added even more internal pressure to a structure already strained to its breaking point. At around 12:40 p.m., during the lunch hour, the breaking point was reached. Witnesses described a deep, grinding roar, a sound like machine guns or a thunderclap. The ground shook. A crack appeared near the base of the tank and, in a fraction of a second, shot around the structure. The steel walls, hundreds of tons of them, ripped apart like paper. Huge, jagged pieces of the tank were hurled hundreds of feet. One massive section sliced through a support column of the elevated railway, causing the tracks to buckle and collapse. Another piece smashed into the Engine 31 firehouse next door, crushing part of the building and the men inside. And then came the wave. Freed from its container, the 2.3 million gallons of molasses erupted outwards. It was a brown tide, 15 to 25 feet high, moving at an estimated 35 miles per hour. It wasn't a slow ooze, it was a battering ram. The wave slammed into a nearby house, lifting it completely off its foundation and killing a mother and her young son inside. It demolished the city's public works building, killing several workers eating their lunch. It surged into Boston Harbor, turning the water brown, and it poured through the streets, engulfing pedestrians, trucks, and dozens of horses from a nearby stable. For anyone caught in the open, there was no escape. The force of the impact was devastating, but the true horror was the molasses itself. The thick, sticky liquid clogged mouths and noses, making breathing impossible. As the wave settled and cooled, it became a suffocating trap, a hardening tomb for its victims. In the minutes that followed, the neighborhood was a scene of horror and heroism. 116 cadets from the USS Nantucket, a nearby training ship, were among the first rescuers, wading into the treacherous goo to pull people out. Police, firefighters, and Red Cross nurses rushed to help, but the molasses made every step a struggle. They worked to clear the airways of the living and tried to identify the dead, whose features were hidden by the brown coating. The cleanup was a nightmare. Crews used high-pressure salt water from fireboats to slowly wash the sticky mess into the harbor. It took months, and the sickly sweet smell of molasses hung over Boston for the entire summer. In the end, 21 people were killed, and over 150 were injured. The victims were a cross-section of the neighborhood: Italian immigrants, Irish-American laborers, city workers, and even young children. This brings us to the monumental legal battle that followed. The victims and their families filed one of the first and largest class action lawsuits in the state's history against U.S.I.A. The company's defense was as cynical as it was calculated. They claimed the tank hadn't failed on its own. They said it was blown up by anarchists. This was during the height of America's first Red Scare, a time of intense fear of radicals and immigrants. U.S.I.A. tried to use this political panic to its advantage, framing itself as a victim of anti-capitalist saboteurs. The court appointed a single auditor, Colonel Hugh W. Ogden, to determine the facts. For 3 years, Ogden conducted a massive investigation. He heard testimony from over 1,000 witnesses, from company executives to the local residents who spoke of the tank's constant groaning and leaking. In 1925, Ogden released his final report. He completely dismantled the anarchist theory, finding no evidence of a bomb. His conclusion was clear and damning. The tank was structurally unsound from the day it was built. He cited the thin steel, the low factor of safety, and the lack of proper testing. The disaster was a direct result of corporate negligence. Faced with this irrefutable verdict, U.S.I.A. was forced to settle, paying out the equivalent of nearly $10 million today. A group of working-class immigrants had taken on one of the most powerful corporations in the country, and they had won. So what is the real legacy of this bizarre tragedy? It's a legacy written in our building codes. Before the flood, getting a permit for a huge industrial structure was shockingly easy. After the disaster, Boston, and then cities across the country, passed new laws. These laws required that all construction plans be filed with the city and, most importantly, be signed and sealed by a certified engineer or architect, who was now personally and professionally accountable for the design's safety. The disaster became a classic case study in engineering ethics, a cautionary tale about the deadly consequences of cutting corners and prioritizing profits over people. The 21 victims of the molasses flood did not die in vain. Their tragedy helped create the modern regulatory world that keeps us safe every day. It's a powerful reminder that progress without conscience is dangerous, and that the fight for corporate accountability is a battle that continues to this day. So what are your thoughts on this? Let us know down in the comments. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.